So the other night, my boyfriend, daughter, and I were walking in the cemetery a few blocks from our house. We drove because we wanted maximum walking time with the toddler. We planned to play Pokemon Go. We entered through the main entrance, and after a few steps, I started feeling nauseous and worried. Anxious. Didn't know why, just ignored it. We wanted to check out the huge headstones towards the middle, so we headed that way. We noticed a car parked with its lights off, no front license plate, passenger and back doors wide open, and the man is halfway in the back seat. He's parked on one side of the big headstones, which ended up being priests. Monsignor and such. We walked through and the guy noticed us. He closed the doors that were open, then went around to the driver's side and got in the car. Sat there and just watched us. So we veered away from him and went down a different path. My daughter all of a sudden says, "They're so loud." Who? The rocks. They're talking to me. My mouth drops open. We didn't tell her anything about the cemetery or headstones. She has no idea what they are other than big rocks. We ended up leaving, and as soon as we drove away, my nausea eased up. I told my boyfriend about feeling sick, and he freaked out and explained EMF to me. Creepy. We went to the store and passed the cemetery on the way home again. His car was still there. He left after we pulled down our street we lived on. We've had one other paranormal experience with her before. This was the second time that afterlife, ghosts, spirits, something exists, and it's confirmed for me. Later that night, she was talking about the rocks again and said they were watching us. I said, "What did they look like?" She said, "Shadows." She said they looked like this, and then proceeds to make a worried expression. Told me they couldn't walk with us and had to stay by the rocks. Were the spirits warning us about the man? Or were there maybe some not so good spirits at that cemetery? So this story needs a little background to paint the full picture. So for those of you who don't know, Lou Gehrig was a Hall of Fame baseball player who played for the Yankees for 17 seasons. He's also the guy who died from and is the namesake of Lou Gehrig's disease. So Lou was an adamant fisherman and moved to our town and would spend his free time fishing in our bay, over where you can catch some pretty big stripers and bluefish. Back in the early 20th century, our bay always had water in it, but during the Great Depression, they built a bridge to an island and did a lot of public works. So now at low tide, we only have mud. So in 1941, Lou passed away at the young age of 38. So this is where my part of the story comes in. So my dad gets up early for work and would always see this eerie figure fishing off the rock pier in the dock. He would always vanish with the fog, and my dad would just assume leave to go to work. I had never seen him before, but my dad mentioned this man he saw every morning around 5 a.m, but we never really thought anything of it. Jump ahead to January of 2020, when I was working on a construction site and had to start waking up very early in the morning to get to Long Island by 6 a.m. Every morning, I would see the man fishing in the fog and never really thought much of it, until one particularly snowy day at low tide. So this morning, I saw the man fishing on the pier on a day where it was below freezing, with high winds and snow falling, which I thought was pretty strange, but to each his own. While I was sitting in traffic on I-95, something clicked in my head that makes no sense for someone to be fishing in these conditions. On top of the extreme cold, there was literally no water where he was fishing. Then, I started connecting the dots and realised he's always fishing at the same time, with or without water in the bay, and always vanished with the fog. For a while, my dad and I were joking around about the ghost of a fisherman, but didn't take long and didn't take seriously or give it much thought until we talked to some of our neighbours who have lived in the community a bit longer. And according to the old-timers, they claim it's the ghost of Lou. I cannot confirm these details, and I don't think anyone really can, because I wasn't alive in 1941. But allegedly, Lou was a regular at that fishing spot and was a big morning fisherman. And also allegedly, the ghost didn't appear there until shortly after he passed away. Anyway, I don't know if it's actually the ghost of Lou Gehrig, but I certainly hope it's a ghost. Otherwise, some poor soul has absolutely no idea that you need water to fish. I'm 16 and I live in Greece. I like going on long rides with my bike. It's relatively new, so I usually don't have trouble with it, like the chain dislocating or something. The last few times I went to ride my bike, I went to a small village that is conveniently near. So I decided to go there. At first it seemed like it was a good idea, because the moment I went there, the seaside view was amazing. And it goes very nicely along with the fort there. After the fort and the park accompanying it, there's just a relatively big street full of small houses, with a small port for fishing boats. If you go to the port, with an even more amazing view, there's a small forest full of olive trees near there. The forest is really small to be considered a forest, so let's just call it a small cluster of trees. Even though it's small in range, it was full of darkness. It was pitch black under the trees, as if something was blocking sunlight from going under the trees. That little cluster of olive trees was somewhere I both wanted and didn't want to go to at the time. But I ended up not going, because there was a fence. After going around the cluster of trees, I took a short, disappointed look at it, because I wanted to see how cool it would be there. I immediately regretted it. I saw something move. I have myopia, 15 degrees to be specific, which is a lot. And because of that, I couldn't make out what it was that moved. I stopped my bike to take a closer look, and I saw a four-legged thing. At first I thought it was a wolf that was really close, but it was far away and much bigger than a wolf. I didn't get a good look at it, but it looked 2 or 2.5 times my height. The worst part is, when it turns around, it looked directly at me, as if it knew I was looking at it. That was the moment I determined it wasn't an oversized wolf. It had human eyes, human teeth along with canine teeth, and a really long human nose. The lack of sunlight in the forest made it hard to see, so I might be wrong about some of its features. But its bright yellow glowing eyes are what scared me the most. It was like a ray of light was coming out of its eyes and was being pointed right at me. The moment it started to move, I realized I had a couple of seconds to look at it a bit more before it could start booking it with the bike. It stood on 2 legs instead of 4, and it started chasing me, moving like a human. That's when I got on my bike and just went away as fast as I could. I didn't go to my hometown, I just wanted to get away fast. So without thinking, I went further away into the town. That turned out to be a bad idea, because I saw another cluster of trees, and that's when I saw the true horror of the village. A very tall and skinny thing just standing there. At first I thought it was a tree, but it was moving with my bike, and I saw it had 2 legs. When all this was happening, it was 8 PM, so there was still a bit of sunlight. Though when I saw the skinny figure, I realized the wolf thing wasn't chasing me at all. It never left its tree cluster. So I thought the same thing would happen with the pole-looking thing. How wrong I was. Its legs were larger than I thought. They went all the way up to its head. It had no torso. And that's when I saw its arms. Oh God, its arms. They started off normally, but as I looked further down, its arms, they split multiple times as if they were branches, but with fingers at the end. That moment was perfect for me to go as fast as I ever could on my bike and go back home. As I was almost out of there, I took one last look at the thing. It had the same eyes as the other monster. Bright, glowing yellow eyes looking directly at me. I almost fell off my bike when the thing screamed. It was a very low frequency sound, but it went up gradually. I know it was the thing screaming because it opened its god-awful, terrifying mouth. It was like its small skinny head that looked like a straight line expanded like rubber to look like a sphere. After going home that night, which was yesterday, I decided to never go to that village ever again. I never told the story to anyone because they would tell me to stop trying to scare them and to piss you off. I was 20 years old and recently entered the gay dating world. Was seeing this guy for a bit. I introduced him to my best friend. My date suggested we all go on a late night drive along the rich country estates and past a massive shoe tree. I recently had 2 pairs of worn shoes and boots I didn't need, so I brought them to add to the tree collection. Despite my best friend's objections, I hung the 2 pairs of shoes. On the drive back to the city, my date googled the shoe tree at that intersection. Supposedly, people hang shoes on the tree to commemorate a couple that were murdered at that intersection a century ago. The next night, my date took me to the movies. We drove back to my house and chatted in the car at the end of my driveway. He was telling me about work when I noticed the porch light activated about 14 houses down the road. I noticed a figure in the driveway. They were very tall and wore a white flowing sheet over their head with distinct long sleeves. I pointed out to my date, and we both start getting a bit nervous as it's staring right at us, unmoving. After a minute, the figure turns towards the porch light. The light goes out, and the figure disappears. 2 houses closer to us, the porch light activates and the figure is standing on the porch, swaying back and forth. The light goes out and the figure disappears again. Again, 2 houses closer, the porch light activates and the figure is standing in the driveway. At this point, we're freaking out, and my date drives us away before it gets any closer. Eventually, I made it home, but I didn't get much sleep. The next day, my parents went out and I was loading up the laundry in the basement. I heard my dad's footsteps come back in the house on the main floor. I must have forgotten something. I heard him walk from the front door to the back door, back and forth, over and over. As I go to check it out, I hear my dad climb the stairs to the top floor. I reach the main floor. The front door is still locked. My parents are gone, and someone is in my house. I don't know where the courage came from, but I ran up those stairs to confront them. When I reached the top floor, it was silent. There are 5 rooms upstairs, and the bathroom in front of me is the only room I can see inside perfectly. I run inside the bathroom and lock the door. The footsteps start again from one end of the hall to the other, slowly getting louder and louder, until they're stomping right outside the bathroom door. I yell, "Leave me alone!" and the stomping ends. My parents arrive a few moments later. These are the only 2 experiences I've ever had. All I know is I will never throw old shoes on a shoe tree ever again. My maternal grandfather died last April of May 2013 due to diabetic complications. My grandma died years before him already. After his death, his children subdivided their inherited land into 6 equal parts and lived in each. Years after, the eldest was experiencing financial difficulties. He was a public vehicle driver and was not earning much, so he decided to sell his inherited piece of land. He had a vivid dream of my dead grandfather, telling them that if he really sold the land, my grandpa would give them a sickness or disease. Unfazed, my uncle pushed through and sold his land. A few months after, he had a mild stroke and ended up having his left side of the body paralyzed. Around 4 or 5 years ago, the 5th sibling had a stroke too and got his head operated on. Went home, but died the next year. The 6th sibling also had financial difficulties and sold his land last year. Last March, he had a diabetic coma and died. The 4th sibling was found having a seizure by his co-workers. He was rushed to a public hospital and he had a stroke. Half of his body got paralyzed. He was responsive and talkative, but after 2 or 3 days, he died. He sold half of his lot last year due to pandemic-induced unemployment. The 2nd sibling's husband got into a bad motorbike accident this morning and hit his head really bad. He died at 3 p.m. at the hospital. My aunt said that last night, her husband blurted out his intention to sell my grandpa's old motorbike on Facebook. Are these just coincidences? Or is my grandpa being possessive of this earthly stuff? Or is there something fouler afoot? The first time I ever saw death was when I was 7. Before moving to the US, I lived in my aunt's house with my aunt's family, my mom and sister. The house only had 3 bedrooms, so my mom, sister and I shared a room with 1 bed. One night after watching a movie, I woke up to something I'll never forget. As I opened my eyes, I saw a shapeless figure on the upper corner of the room. All of a sudden, I began shaking, crying, and screaming in fear all at the same time. Even though I was afraid of what was before me, I just couldn't look away. I began pulling on my mom, screaming at her to wake up and look, but she couldn't see anything. I don't remember the rest of that night. A few days went by, and my mom's boyfriend at the time came over to watch a movie. In the same room where I saw the figure, we all sat down, my sister and I on the floor, and my mom and her boyfriend on the bed. About 30 minutes into the movie, we began hearing a loud snoring sound coming from my mom's boyfriend. My mom began trying to wake him up, but it wasn't working no matter how hard she tried. After a few seconds, my mom's boyfriend fell on the floor and began spitting foam from his mouth and shaking uncontrollably. We called 911 and he's taken to the hospital where he died. Soon after the funeral, we had a pastor come into the house to pray over it. My mom told him what had happened to me a couple days prior and to her boyfriend's death, not expecting it to be relevant. He then walked up to the room where I saw the figure and was shocked. He explained to my mom that what I had seen was the angel of death, and that explained why he died in that room. Although I didn't see the figure often, when I do something bad, it always happens. I've been seeing it again recently, and all I can do is wait for something to happen. When we reached 10 years old, my cousin and I were allowed to play on the street, just outside my auntie's house. There was a busy lane which ran down beside the side of the house, where all the kids used to run up and down, kick a football around, ride the bikes, and generally mess around. I liked it, because I had a long walkway to practice pushing my wheelchair without the danger of the main road, and my cousin, our friends and I spent hours of fun running and wheeling up and down that lane. There was a funny little dead-end alley just leading off the lane, which always had a weird vibe around it. There was only one house at the end of the dead-end alley, and all the kids used to call it. The house was different from all the other houses around it. The others were bright, colourful, and cheerful, full of life, with neighbours talking over the fences with one another, and always ready to tell us kids off for making too much row. The house down dead-end alley was always dark. Even on a sweltering hot summer's day, it always seemed to have a gloom hanging over it like a dark, ominous cloud. Obviously, we being merely 10 years old were banned by my mama and aunt from going anywhere near the alley, let alone the empty abandoned house. Although my older cousin and his mates, who were 13, hung around Dead End Alley from time to time, with the sole purpose of frightening his little sister and me, with horror stories of the house and its imaginary monstrous inhabitants. Having heard the rumours about the dark history of the house had the dubious reputation as a haunted house. One typical summer's day, my cousin and I were playing in the lane with our friends. We kept hearing a baby crying. Now being in the middle of a council estate, it's not uncommon to hear a baby cry, so we paid no attention. However, as the afternoon wore on, the baby's cry became louder and constant, almost deliberate. That got our attention, and we all decided to investigate the noise, so we stopped playing and began to look around. To our horror, after searching for the root of the noise, we realised that the baby's cries were originating from the front garden of the dead-end alley house. One of our friends, who was slightly older, said he would go nearer to have a look. We were all concerned by now, as it seemed obvious to all present that it was a real baby who was in distress. But everyone present also pleaded with him not to do it. But he was a very principled moral person, and his conscience overcame him. We waited for 10 minutes until he came back. He looked awful. His face was white as a sheet, and he looked physically shaken. He told us that he went into the garden, but there was no sign of a baby anywhere. His best mate asked him if he saw anything else, and just nodded and said, "I don't want to talk about it." Nobody forced the issue. In fact, I think everyone was secretly relieved about it. We left very quickly and returned to the safety of home. Years later, my cousin and I were talking to her mom, and she began to tell us about the history of the local area. The subject of the dead-end alley house came up. We were horrified by what my auntie told us. It still gives me chills talking about it now. In the 1940s, the area where their family lived was way more rougher than it was present day. Lots of domestic violence, gangs, prostitution, and unwed mothers. Also a high pregnancy rate, which is to be expected in some ways, what with the war. Along with it came a fair percentage of unwanted babies. It turns out that the house in Dead End Alley was a baby farm, where women took their babies that they couldn't look after or didn't want, to women or couples and for a fee. They would take these abandoned infants in and find good homes for them. It was said by the locals that the couple running the baby farm were quite an unsavoury pair, and there were rumours at the time of coercion and intimidation of young unwed mothers to give the awful couple their babies, and neglect and abuse of their young charges. Then, the scandal was uncovered. In the 50s, the remains of several infant babies were found in the front garden in a shed where the husband kept his gardening tools. The couple were obviously charged with murder, and because of the number of remains discovered, they were put away for a long time. We don't really know what the truth is of what happened that hot summer's day long ago, but my cousin and I have our theories. My family had always moved often, but out of all the homes we rented, this 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath was my favourite. We moved to this brick home in the rural parts of my state during the summer between my 5th and 6th grade. My parents would eventually move out when I was about 21 years old and serving in the military. I think the reason why we lived there longer than any other home was because the rent was cheap. The owners were the best people on the planet, and we had open access for hunting and exploring on the owners' surrounding 15 plus acres. My dad worked tobacco and hay for the neighbour across the street after his 9 to 5, and on the weekend to stay busy and raise a bit more money for us to live on. My mum could have her garden and not so much house to keep up. My older brother, younger sister and I would play in the basement, the old barn, and everywhere else we could get to. I really grew up in this place. To give a bit of background on myself while I lived there, I was a homebody. I liked, and still do, my alone time to do whatever I wanted and enjoy a quiet house. So anytime that I could stay home alone, I would. My brother was off with his friends, my sister off doing something with the church group, mom out getting groceries, dad in the fields. I had a lot of time just to hang out. Now this house, I had always estimated that it had to have been built in the 1950s or 60s. Brick house, ranch style, with a basement. Possibly the 70s. I just tried looking it up online, and popular real estate sites have no data on when it was first built. All parts of the house seem too original to it. The kitchen, all blue half bathroom, aluminium storm doors, single pane wooden windows, all except for the original room, built on with old vinyl sliding. Nothing really seemed out of ordinary about this place. I remember on so many occasions in which I would be home alone, working on some project in the old basement, when I would hear the storm door open and my dad's heavy boots walk through the kitchen to get lunch or something. I would go up and say hi, and there he would be. But there were almost just as many times when I would go up there, and there would be nobody. No truck in the driveway, no nothing. But I heard it all. I spent many nights, this is in the mid to late 90s mind you, where I would stay up in the living room until 3, maybe 4 in the morning. I would stay up and flick through the dozen or so antenna channels. Nothing but garbage on television, but I would stay up anyway. It was quiet. The way the couch was situated, I could see all the way down the hallway, and the television was against the wall, so that if I laid on the couch, I would see down the hall right past my feet. The hall was my 12 o'clock. The TV was my 11. One night, somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, while watching TV and my household asleep, I saw her. An older woman with a dress, white blouse and hair in a bun, walking from the right bedroom to the left. I sat up, stared and listened for the bedroom doors to shut, but heard nothing. I eventually got up and checked the hallways. All doors were shut. I gently rapped on the door where I saw the woman go, my younger sister's room. No answer, so I gently opened the door. She was asleep in bed, hair down and in shorts and a blue tank top. Mom had short hair. I decided to go ahead and call it a night. I must have fallen asleep and dreamed. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to several years when my folks moved out of town and finally bought their first home. A place very much like the one I grew up in. It was Halloween 2008. Many years had passed since seeing this old woman, and I never once had thought about telling anyone about it. We decided to watch a ghost hunt live broadcast by some famous TV paranormal investigators, and our conversation turned towards personal experiences. That's when I brought up the old house. I told them, I've often wondered if the other house had something going on. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps, but found nobody home but me. Mom replied, "Oh yeah, I've always thought that. Never wanted to upset all of you though. Seemed harmless to me though. One time, real late, I saw a woman in the hallway." My eyes must have gone wide. I said, "White blouse, dress?" Mom, quietly, "Hair in a bun." I thought often about that conversation. About a year later, after my interest had peaked enough that I wanted to try and investigate known hauntings, which I never really did, I was able to get in touch with the owners. Mom and Dad still had their numbers. I received the funniest answer from them when I asked about possibly checking it out for any hauntings. "We miss your parents. They stayed there for longer than most of our other tenants. We have some good people in there now, and we don't want them to get scared away from someone asking about ghosts." He meant that in a sincere way, not a threatening or dismissive way. But I will say, you're not the first to have mentioned something to us about the place being haunted. He wouldn't say any more, but I wouldn't have forced it. I left it at that. I'm alright with that being my answer. I've driven past the place 2 other times since. Yeah, getting teary-eyed at my fond memories where I grew up. But every time I think about that place, I can't help but also remember what I experienced when I was alone. Back when I was in college, me and my brother were living in the same apartment in Manila. Our room is at the back of the apartment building, where the access to our water tank and circuit breakers is, because this room is cheaper. The only way you can get to our room is through a thick metal door. I'm a nursing student, and sometimes I'm on night duty, so my brother and I don't see each other often. Then one day, my brother was angry at me and asked if I was leaving our keys to other people. And I told him, of course not, why would I do that? And he said, because I couldn't sleep last night. Someone keeps knocking on our door. I told him that's probably our neighbour's door you're hearing, which is actually quite impossible given the location of our room. I find it ridiculous until it happens to me. It was in the afternoon. I was sleeping as I was from my night duty when I heard someone knocking on our door. Thought it was my brother. I was mad. I asked him, "Don't you have your keys?" And when I open it, no one is there. I still have my doubts. Maybe it's some kind of acoustic illusion or whatnot, so I just ignore it. It happened several times more. It even happened when me and my brother were in our room together. We're trying to investigate what it is. After we heard the knock, we even rushed to go outside and open the metal door, check if someone is pranking on us, check if it's coming from somewhere else. We tried to find out what it is scientifically, but the knock is really coming from our wooden floor. So I theorized a plan to get rid of it. Back when I was in college, we had to submit a thesis as a requirement. Me and my group were doing research in Manila Boys Town. This is where miners who are in conflict with the law are sent, and this place is said to be haunted. Though this place looks nice, full of trees, fresh air, it feels that this place is very depressing. Most of these children have a history of abuse from their parents or relatives, so you can see the psychological reason why these children have committed crimes. Some children have even committed suicide. But what makes this place more haunted is because one of its buildings caught on fire and killed some children. So in my theory, one of the spirits of these children followed me. I think spirits are attracted to extreme emotions. That's why it followed me. I was emotionally disturbed at that time because I found out my mother is having an affair while my father is working abroad. I could also relate to these children, as I was also a victim of abuse when I was younger. So what I did was, I told the spirit to follow me again and we'll go back to Manila Boys Town. Then we went back. I said a short prayer and went back again to our apartment. And guess what? The knocking stopped. And to be honest, it's not a scary experience for me. I don't know why. Maybe the spirit is not evil. I hope these children eventually find peace here on Earth, or in the afterlife. Throughout my life, especially between the ages of about 8 to 18, I've experienced many odd and unexplainable things in my home. Some memories include one night I was playing Xbox in my lounge, and my kitchen is visible if you turn around when facing the TV. On this night, I know for a fact I was not tired, and I went to stretch, and when I did so, I could see a lady in a white Victorian dress, black hair, standing in the corner of the kitchen just watching me. I stayed for about 10 seconds, and only when I looked away and back was she gone. This moment I'll never forget. Furthermore, often if there's a chair outside in our courtyard and I walk past, I used to often see a little girl just sitting in the chair. But when I look again, she's gone. Also one night, I was having a dream that about 5 people were standing around my bed, and I felt a pinch on my back that made me wake up. And the same 5 figures were standing around my bed in the exact same locations. However, they were pitch black. Furthermore, my brother has told me of many experiences he has had in his room at night, ranging from sleep paralysis and seeing figures by his door. Till this day, I refuse to sleep in his room or enter his room in the dark, as I always get a bad vibe from it. There have also been numerous times when my family would be sleeping, and it would sound like glasses being shattered in the kitchen. Our parents even used to blame us, but then they also saw that nothing was broken and that we were not anywhere near the kitchen. I've often had a great fascination towards the paranormal and feel as if I could sense things around me that some people cannot. What follows occurred in 2005, when I was going through a very messy and painful divorce. Looking back, I remember fighting so hard for so long to keep it together in a situation which was a lost cause for years. I set the stage this way to help you, the reader, understand that for months as this dragged on, I was not in a good place at all. And so it was on a certain night, after another day of too many cigarettes and far too much dark anguish, that I laid there wanting to go to sleep. Sleep was difficult during this time for me, but at some point I did fall asleep. And at some point, the following experience happened. I found myself standing in about a foot of fresh snow, which at the time I thought was interesting since it was summer in the waking world. The dream was lucid in that I remember looking behind me and there were no footsteps in the snow. I didn't walk there. It was night, and based on the enormous tree line surrounding me that I could make out in the moonlight, I was in the middle of some vast forest. In front of me was a small cabin, lit from the inside, with smoke trailing from the chimney. It was then that I started to feel the cold, and so I walked up to it. I knocked on the door and was shocked when my father answered the door. He had died in 2000, and we were extremely close. I couldn't believe it, and for a few minutes it was hugs and tears, and somehow I had all these pictures of my daughters in my pockets all of a sudden. So I was taking them out and showing them, telling him stories. He was patiently smiling, but I could tell that he was listening for my benefit. And it soon set in that he had seen every one of these moments with me and my kids. Seen everything. And I still hold on to this day that he watches over my girls. Something struck me though as odd once I began to take this all in. My dad was not the rustic type. In fact, he hated camping, etc. In looking around, I could see the place was filled with books that had made it comfortable. But this didn't really feel like his place, if you catch my drift. I must have mentioned that because I watched his face change into something a bit more somber, and he answered, "It's because I don't really belong here. I'm supposed to be somewhere else." I didn't understand what he meant, and he must have read it on my face. He read on, "I'm here for you, son. I came here to this place to help you, but we're running out of time. You're here because I have something to show you." In the next instant, we were back in the snow behind the cabin. The moon was really bright, I remember, because I could see pretty clearly. We were standing in front of this gigantic kennel with a high fence all around it. I was confused. It was then that I could see two large shadows moving in the shadows in the back. I began to hear the sounds they were making, and I'll never forget it. It was like a growl and a whine at the same time. I think they sensed who I was or something, because they shot forward into the light, and I saw them for the first time. They were two huge black wolves, but so horrible looking. They were so enraged, and at the same time so sick. Their hair was matted in filth, and gone altogether in sickly patches, with bloody spots where they had bitten themselves or each other. They were throwing themselves at the fence, almost blindly to get at me. I remember they were biting at the fence until their mouths were bloody. Once or twice, they bumped into each other, and then they would immediately tangle in a bloody, violent fight. Dark blood fell on the snow. Somehow, I knew that this must have been going on for a very long time. The whole scene was so frightening, so repulsive, and so confusing. Again, this sort of thing was so out of character for my dad, who loved animals. I asked him why he was doing this. Why are you keeping these things around? I remember my dad's face, so kind, but pained too, I could see. He said, "Son, don't you understand? This is what I'm here for, in the middle of nowhere, hidden a way out of here. I'm here to help you." He motioned to the kennel. "Those two wolves are your anger and your fear, and they're tearing everything apart. I came here to keep them here, to keep you safe. But son, I can't hold them any longer. You can't hold them here any longer. They'll destroy everything. You aren't going to live much longer like this." I stood there in the silence. Even the wolves had fallen silent, and I wanted to cry. All of it came into view. The beating myself up, the huge toll it was taking on me, my mental and physical health, all coming to the point where I was actually facing my own death. I knew that part to be true. I could be dead within days. All of it was because someone didn't love me. What was actually doing the most damage, what was killing me, was that I refused to love myself. I could tell by my dad's face that he saw me coming to this realization, and he smiled in relief. "Are you ready?" he asked. I was terrified they would attack me, but I knew there was no choice. With the whole world watching, it felt like I walked up with as much courage as I had and flung open the gate. With that growling whine that was deafening, the wolves leapt out of the kennel, finally free. They stood there for a moment, locking eyes with me, their hair standing on end. For a second, I thought they were going to kill me, payment for keeping them in a cage. And finally, without a look back, they charged together in the forest. Where they went, I don't know. I remember looking at my dad, not knowing what to do next. There were no more words, just a feeling that the experience was over. I knew that this place would never be here again for me, but my father would, which was more than enough. And it was then that I woke up. It was early morning. I felt mentally and physically drained, somehow not the same. But there was also a knowing that the worst was behind me, that I was not going to die yet. The wolves were released. Day by day, I slept better. As the moving day approached, I found myself looking forward to a new life. My girls and I had the best adventures when we were together, great memories we talk about to this day. I owe much of that turning point to my dad, who put himself in a cabin in the middle of some nowhere to keep me from tearing myself apart. What I'm about to discuss started happening from a young age and occurred until I was around 18. I'd like to say I don't believe it actually happened, but the creepiness of it and how it made me feel for those 13 years has stuck with me. 1996, age 5. My mom always read me a bedtime story when she put me to bed, and I always fell asleep. This particular night I didn't fall asleep, and she stayed with me a while longer until she fell asleep herself, and I was still awake. I was kind of bored and just looking around the room. I looked up at the window, positioned behind my bed, and even though the blinds were closed, I was able to see through the cracks in the turned down blinds. I immediately saw two reddish eyes looking in. I thought they were eyes because I kept looking for a while. They were moving around a little like they weren't completely stationary, and then appeared to blink. I immediately turned over and woke up my mom. She said it was just a dream and to go back to sleep, but to this day, I swear I had never slept and was awake. My bedroom window was above our balcony, but you would have to be really tall or on a ladder to see into my window from it. I don't have any siblings, and my dad was asleep when this happened. Not long after that, I did have a nightmare about what I saw. I dreamed that it was a wolf-like animal, and my dad was fighting in the hallway to our bedrooms. I woke up and immediately knew it was a dream. But to this day, I still don't think what I saw initially was a dream. I developed a deep fear of the dark because of this. 2007, age 16. From 1996 to 2007, I'd never seen any occurrence like what I saw that first night, but I switched to turning my blinds upwards so I couldn't see outside. For some reason, even before the nightmare, I had decided it was a wolf-like animal. Not sure why. I still had a deep fear of the dark. Since it happened, I would intermittently have a feeling like something was watching me, or I wasn't alone. Sometimes it felt like an unfriendly presence, and other times it felt comforting, like something was protecting me. I once went a year without getting the feeling, and it hit me when I was driving home from a friend's house in the middle of the day. The drive from my friend's house was about 20 minutes of rocky barrens with patches of forest. An unfriendly presence hit me so hard that I pulled over, checked the car, and got out of the car. I climbed up a small cliff next to the roadside to look out over the barrens, but there wasn't anything there. I got back in the car and kept driving. I visited this friend a lot, and I started to find that feeling would hit me at the exact same spot in those barrens, day or night, but only in the night around my parents' house. This same friend slept over one night. We went out onto my deck so we could have a cigarette, and I got the feeling of an unfriendly presence. At this point in life, I was screaming at myself that I was being irrational. There was nothing there. I didn't see a wolf-like creature, I just thought I saw it. As I was thinking this, I realized my friend was looking out into the small patch of forest behind my house, squinting. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she could swear she saw something watching us and moving around, like a dog, but a lot bigger. At this point, I was shitting my pants and coaxed her inside. I'd never told her about this story, so she would have never known about my speculations. 2009, age 18. Still haven't seen any evidence myself since I was 5. Only my friend's observations, which aligned with what I think I saw as a kid. I still felt like something was intermittently watching me, both at home, on the drive to that same friend's house, and even around where she lived. I started dating someone that lived not too far away from her, so we all hung out a lot. At this point, I'm still scared of the dark. Sometimes I would walk down a trail by myself and would be completely fine. Other times I was crippled with fear and ran or had someone lead me. One time camping, I felt the presence so bad that I had to get my boyfriend to lead me to our tent while I shut my eyes and covered my ears. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every noise scared the shit out of me, and it didn't help that other people were around. I remember driving home the next day, and I did feel like something was watching me, but this was one of those times that it felt comforting, more comforting than it had ever felt before. 2010, aged 19. Driving over to see the same boyfriend, I realized I hadn't felt that feeling like something was watching in a long time, probably since I had that last comforting feeling. I drove through the barrens almost every day, and without that feeling popping up. It was just like that. I moved away from my hometown soon after. Present day, age 29. No more sightings, no more feelings like something is watching. My crippling fear of the dark went away, and even though the dark still makes me feel uneasy, I prefer to go for runs at night. I've lived back home for a while, but mainly lived in the city and have since moved out of the province entirely. To this day, it's never returned and appears to have just stopped abruptly, but it's probably the thing that stuck with me the most over the years, since I was a kid. From 2008 to 2013, my uncle owned a bakery where I worked during my college years. The building itself was a very old one, and was basically just a long rectangle shape. We divided it up into 3 rooms and added the actual bakery part onto the back. The first room was a storefront with a door to the right that led into our cake decorating room. It's what it sounds like. A room where we would decorate cakes, store things, and just use it as a general back room. Continuing through that room was the second back area with freezers and the storage closet, and a mini office room divided off from it. Continuing from there through the original back door was the bakery. Anyway, that building had actually been a lot of things in life. There were multiple bars, a hair salon at one point, and it was even a brothel. This was a place where some pretty famous gangsters also passed through back in the day, so even its basement had hidden rooms from the times of Prohibition. But this is all just backstory for what the building itself is and was. As for what happened to us working there, it was just a lot of strange things. The first thing I can ever remember happening was the cupcake holder flying across the room. We kept it on a shelf on the right side of the cake decorating room by the door, and one day we heard a loud crash that scared the heck out of us. Me and my coworker went back there to see what fell or broke, and to our surprise, we found the cupcake holder all the way across the room, by the other door laying on its side. We didn't think much of it though, as this was before we even would suspect a ghost or whatever. The second event occurred maybe a year or so later, and happened in the middle of the night, while my uncle and the other staff were baking. One of our co-workers turned around to see what appeared to be a little boy, with an old-looking hat on. It freaked her out, but apparently she was a part of some ghost hunting team and said she was used to this sort of thing. That night, I remember me and my parents went over there as well, but of course, we didn't see anything. After this, things started getting a little more weird and annoying. Things would randomly go missing and show up in other places. We'd hear loud footsteps in the back as someone headed to the front. But rather than opening the door and walking into the storefront, they would stop at the door and no one would be there when we opened it to look. Same thing would happen a lot in the back room as well, where you'd hear someone's boots climbing up the ramp from the bakery, but vanish at the top of the ramp. Eventually, my uncle started calling it Little Jimmy. And whenever something weird would happen, we would just blame it on him. Strange things like this continued for years, up until we had to close down. Now, the place has been reopened as yet another bar, and I can't help but wonder if they experienced the same things as we did. One night, me and my co-workers decided to play with a Ouija board outside of work. We talked to a girl named Quinn, who said she was a demon. She seemed pretty cool till towards the end of talking to her. We decided we needed to head home because it was like 2 a.m, but she wouldn't let us say goodbye until we promised that if we ever used the Ouija board again, that we would talk to her. About a week later, the place where we worked caught on fire. So a few days after that, we went to the lake and used the Ouija board again and asked for Quinn. We asked if she started the fire, and she told us that she did. Then it seemed like Quinn got scared or overpowered because the board started acting up, spelled Zozo, and started counting backwards. We quickly said goodbye and moved the planchette to goodbye. About 2 weeks later, I was driving to my friend's house. I should mention that the friend was a girl I was seeing at the time, and she was cheating and using me. I didn't know this at the time. I guess Quinn knew because she seemed mad, protective, and jealous when me and my friends mentioned the girl's name the first time we used it on the Ouija board. So on the way to her house, I hydroplaned and flipped my truck. I have to add, the Ouija board in the truck. Some people driving down the road stopped to help get the door open, and I climbed up and out. When the cops arrived, they made sure I was okay and said they had to write me a ticket just because of the accident. I don't have the ticket anymore because this happened about 4 years ago, but the address site of the accident was Route 666, Virginia. To give a little background, I go to UNCA, which is located in the Appalachian Mountains. Creatures such as bears and opossums are often spotted walking around campus, which kind of makes the college experience more interesting, especially when you're walking around at night. So one night at around 11 p.m, I decided to go outside and walk around the track field that's adjacent to my dorm building to clear my head and stuff. Keep in mind that I've done this plenty of times before, and I've had no weird experiences until that night. So I started walking laps around the track, and by the time I made my third lap, I came up to this part where to my right is a steep slope with bushes covering it. Getting closer to it, I started hearing what sounded like something moving in the bushes on the slope. I wouldn't have really taken notice of it if it weren't for the fact that it sounded like footsteps. Like usually if it were a small animal, the noises it'd make while moving through bushes would be lighter and more scattered. So I immediately came to the conclusion that it was probably a black bear, and that I was about to have my first encounter with one. But as I continued to stare into the bushes, I saw no movement whatsoever. The footsteps sounded like whatever it was should have been on the slope, and yet I saw no black mass moving through the bushes, nor any bushes moving around due to movement. Something that I also noticed was that the footsteps sounded very human, and they were at a consistent slow beat. So at this point I'm freaked out, because I have no idea what the fuck is walking or crawling through those bushes. So, like the white dude I am, I decided to yell out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" As soon as I said that, the footsteps stopped. This deafening silence lasted for around 10 seconds before they resumed again, but this time they sounded like they were getting closer, and yet I still saw no signs of movement. Scared shitless, I finally gathered the courage to bolt the fuck out of there, and I got to my dorm safely. Again, I have no idea what it was, as I never saw it. All I know is that it was something big. I've heard enough stories to know that there are definitely weird creatures like Wendigos in Appalachia, but I'm not sure if that's what was stalking around in those bushes. What do you guys think? I've been very intrigued by this phenomenon. I've had two people I was close with, unrelated individuals, who predicted their death fairly accurately, or within a few weeks of the event happening. One of them was my friend who was 35, and he would just talk casually about dying soon and alone, without a wife and kids. Never seemed to bother him, but like it was more of a statement of fact. He told me the last time we hung out outside of work that he was glad he got to know me, and I was a good dude. No terminal illness or anything. Died a couple of weeks later in a car wreck. The other was a friend of mine that was 28. He one day looked at me and told me that he didn't think he would make it to 30. No medical conditions, no dangerous lifestyle or hobbies, run-of-the-mill career and uneventful life. Died about 2 months after this conversation to a brain aneurysm. Fast forward to now, and I think I understand how they felt, although my situation is different. For about the last year, I, 29 male, have been feeling similar thoughts and feelings. Things like the fact that I won't be around much longer. I'm not afraid, which is weird, and I'm not depressed or anxious, no history of it. It's just this feeling I have, super strong and hard to shake. Long story short there, I should have died when I got sepsis, and it got into my bloodstream 4 months back. Now next week, I'm undergoing surgery that requires me to be put under general anesthesia. Granted, this is a generally safe thing to do, and millions of people do it yearly without harm. Again, I'm not nervous, but it feels like this is it for me. Almost like the end of a chapter or closing a book. I didn't just start thinking about this because of the surgery coming up, as I'm sure some of you are thinking. I hope I'm not right, but just in case I am, I'm writing my wife and my kids separate letters to open in the event of my passing. I'll mention these feelings to my wife in the letter, but not my kids. They're still young, under 10, so I'll just make sure how much they're loved. I'm almost as skeptical as they come, but when it comes to paranormal things, along with religion and such, but some things are hard to ignore. Anyone else ever have a loved one or someone close to them predict their death within a reasonable margin? I try to be as logical as I can when I have an experience or something out of the ordinary happens to me or around me. So I always look for an explanation, mostly to calm myself. Every once in a while, I'll be sitting at my computer desk and notice something out of the corner of my eye. I always get a little rush of nervousness when I do, but I can always tie it to something. When I do notice something, I don't particularly rush to turn around and see what it is, since it happens enough to where it doesn't really concern me for whatever reason. This time was different. I was on PlayStation talking to a friend when it happened, and I turned very, very quickly to my left. And I see what appears to be a figure standing looking at me and quickly falling, but falling to its side, so the couch is covering it when it goes down, blocking it from my line of vision. Now this was only for a split second, but I still remember very vividly the description of the figure. It was a girl, maybe 4'8" to 5 feet, wearing a white sleeveless dress with very slim arms. She had what seemed to be a plague doctor mask on with a Native American headdress on top of it. When I saw this, I went dead silent as the biggest fear I had ever felt came over me. My friend on PlayStation kept talking, and I didn't say anything because, like I said in the beginning, I believe we can manifest things, and I didn't want to be that the case. I never give these types of things the attention they deserve, but I knew I had to walk over and check it out. So I walked over, and the fear got bigger and bigger. I kept telling myself nothing should be there, but also that something was there. When I got to the front of my couch where it should have been, nothing was there, and I was almost confused, because it felt like something was, or at least should be there. Didn't talk about it in my apartment, but mentioned it to a couple of friends, and they are split on this. What gets me is the super specific description that I could make out. I don't have a connection to anything it was wearing, not even games I play or shows I watch. Has anyone seen something similar, or had an experience like this? Some years ago, I lived in a haunted trailer with my ex-wife and 2 daughters. It was an old, ugly trailer, coloured yellow with brown trim. It had a carport and a porch. The deck was falling apart, so we dismantled it nail by nail. The trailer was made in 1973. At first, things were fine, but after a few months, we started to notice things going missing, like my ambient and my left shoe. They would turn up in odd places. Then, the doors slamming the toilet flushing, even after I had my uncle, a plumber, replace the inside parts. One day, my oldest daughter at age 3 was having a conversation with something in her room. I asked who she was talking to, and she said our baby brother didn't come along until 2008. Then, there was the shadow men that would come out at night. One night I was on my desktop in the middle of the trailer, and I got up and looked toward the back bedroom, and I saw a cloaked, hooded black figure. It looked at me and then went further into the bedroom. I ran in there, but found nothing but now my ex-wife sleeping. We would also notice a black smoke coming from the bedroom closet. We had a female friend who stayed with us when she had National Guard drill who noticed the activity. My mum was babysitting one night when we went out for our anniversary, and she said she felt like she was being watched the entire time. After a while, we started talking to the entity, things like, "What's new?" or "How was your day?" And the activity stopped as long as we did this. Eventually sold with the trailer. Not sure there's any activity going on still. This is an entirely real story. In July of 2019, I went to Hawaii with my then girlfriend and now wife for a vacation. The first night there, we lay jet-lagged talking about nothing. It was very late. I had my eyes closed and had been suffering from severe anxiety recently, which led me to initially ignore the sudden bright burst of light which bled through my closed eyelids and gave them a reddish colour. I was ready to ignore this light burst, but my girlfriend then asked, "What was that?" I held a contained attitude, typical of anything I assumed to be supernatural, and expressed relief that she saw it too. She had her eyes open, and according to her, the room just got very bright for a quick moment. Snap your fingers, and it was that fast. She describes it as a green so bright, it may as well have been white. What makes this story even crazier is that the Mona Surfrider Inn is listed as one of the most haunted hotels in America. I swear to you, I did not know this prior to looking it up during the following days to the event. Also, we had blackout shades on the windows. This was not an errant light that flooded our room from the room below. This was, as far as I can tell, a genuine encounter with a spirit. Some other events took place while sleeping here, but nothing as significant or as obviously as real this was. I grew up in a very haunted house with lots of activity. My aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, siblings, and parents all have very interesting and disturbing personal stories, and now I'm questioning why I haven't shared any of those yet. But the point is, I'm familiar with paranormal activity. Here's what happened to me 4 nights ago and why I'm seeking help. I spent 3 days returning home from vacation. On day 1, myself and another driver drove 10 hours to our first overnight destination in Sheridan, Wyoming. For some reason, I was feeling very down and depressed. I've been very stressed in my everyday life, and the thought of going back to that after a beautiful vacation was weighing over me. We booked a hotel online quickly at the Roadway Inn. When we arrived, the place was very clean, and I was pleased to be there after a 10-hour drive. This particular place had a main room with a bed, TV, couch, bathroom, and an additional door that led to another small room with a bed. I opened the door to the adjacent room and immediately felt a heavy, dark, and sad energy. I shut the door and said, "Nope, you can sleep in there." I've often felt energy in rooms I didn't like, so I shrugged it off after that and chose not to sleep in there. Shortly after, I decided to take a hot bath. As I was taking a bath, I felt an extreme wave of sadness come over me, and I began sobbing. I chalked it up to my feelings of depression that day, but it's definitely not normal for me. I immediately got into bed and tried to sleep. I was exhausted from hardly getting any sleep at all on the trip, so I was falling asleep quickly. Every time I fell asleep, I would be jerked awake immediately, feeling often that I was being grabbed, and there was always a disturbing image associated with this disruption. I felt a heavy darkness around me. I felt tingly almost around my head, and like there was a swirling of energy. I felt like a kid again, not wanting to move. This went on consistently for about 30 minutes, and then I decided to take a sleeping pill. I'm very sensitive to medications and was soon asleep, sleeping through the night. I woke up the next day and left right away to get driving. The problem I'm having is that ever since that night, I've changed. I'm constantly paranoid, looking over my shoulder, very depressed, periodically crying multiple times throughout the day. I feel off and out of sorts, not connected to reality, non-functioning. I don't feel alone when I'm sitting here alone right now. I feel as if this thing has attached itself to me. I've asked it to leave multiple times. Today is day number 3 of feeling like this. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you and also ask for any advice. I need to fix this immediately.